Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Bible Study Live. It is January 17th, 2021, and here we are getting started. As you guys know, I admit people, and I get a little distracted by doing that, but it's a beautiful morning. We are thankful to have it. We are getting started, and God willing, we will have an excellent time this morning. Good morning, Deb.
Hi,
Morning.
I'm gonna leave Art on camera and
See
just
you and
kind of
Art
hang
this
out.
morning.
Good.
I don't hear you guys just yet, though.
Oh.
Did you say you couldn't hear us?
We'll get all that figured out. So I got some more people that I know are going to be coming in shortly. We got some people on Facebook. Good morning. And okay, I got Claire on here saying she's got no questions from last week. I was expecting more questions from Claire, but that's quite all right.
Did you just put her on the spot?
So if that's the case, then the floor is open and you guys get to decide what we're going to discuss this morning. So I will take a few minutes to sip on my coffee, give you a moment. If you already know what you want to talk about, let's get into it. What do you guys want to discuss this morning? Okay, got more people. I see my daughter's got her hand up. Yes, dear. What do you want to talk about?
What if we talk about how, like, who should you put your faith in when all of this politics stuff is all over?
All right, she just said, I don't know if you guys could hear her, who should we put our faith in when all the politics stuff is what, over?
It's like because
It'll never be over. It's ongoing.
politics stuff, but what if something happened and then like the whole and then they're all disheveled and everything?
All right, so if I think I understand what you're saying, some people are putting their faith in politicians, the political parties. What happens if something goes wrong with them? Where should we put our faith? Heaven forbid, of course, but heaven forbid, what happens if something goes wrong? So that's an excellent question, and I think that's something that we do need to talk about. It's a bit of a follow-up from last week. I got some folks coming in from the waiting room as well. Morning, Claire. Morning, Winsley. It's good to have you guys.
Good morning, brother. Good morning. Good morning.
So my daughter's asked the question, where should we put our faith? And I have a simple verse that I want to share with you. Give me just a minute as I want to look this up and not misquote it. But let's go to John chapter 14, verse 1. By the way, everyone seems to be super quiet. You guys hear me all right? We all good?
Can you hear me, Anthony?
Yes. All right. I'm getting a thumbs up. I'm getting a nod.
Yes.
I think we're good. All right. Got thumbs up. So let's go to John chapter 14, verse 1. John chapter 14, verse 1. If you know anything about the Bible, you know that's going to be Jesus doing the talking. In John chapter 14, as he is alive and walking the earth during much of the Gospels. So when we get to John chapter 14, Jesus has been talking about his death, burial, and resurrection, and the disciples don't really get it. They don't truly understand what Jesus has been saying, but Jesus tells them this to provide comfort to them. He says, do not let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God, trust also in me. Now let's get into this. And by the way, Deb, no, I can't hear you or Art. I'm not sure what's up with that. I'm glad you guys can hear me, but I can't hear. One more time. Let's see. Because it might have been on my end, Deb. What were you saying?
I was asking if you could hear us.
There you are. Now I can hear you.
Okay.
All right. We're all set then. So
Good.
Jesus says, do not let your hearts be troubled. Do you have a choice in whether or not your heart is troubled?
Yes.
Well, I think
You're
we have
absolutely
training.
right. And my daughter's saying the same thing. You got a choice in the matter. Now, how many times does it feel like you don't really have a choice? How many times does it feel like it's just overwhelming, like you're being swept away? But Jesus phrases this as though you have a say in the matter of whether or not your heart is troubled. And I think if we are not in the midst of an emergency, we can agree, we can understand, yeah, I do have a choice in this matter. Jesus says, do not let your hearts be troubled. Will your heart be troubled if you don't do something to stop it?
Yes.
Talk to me. Say that again.
Yes.
All right. I think that was Claire who said yes. My daughter's saying probably. You guys are exactly right. By default, there are things that come up that are troubling. But Jesus says, don't let that happen. There's things that you must do to control that. And here's what he tells you to do. Trust in God. Trust also in me. What does it mean to trust in God?
I believe ultimately it's trusting that he's going to comfort us in our times of need. Like I was thinking when you said that can we control whether our heart is troubled, I was thinking of like, say, example, triggers, right? Sometimes things happen in our lives that trigger us later on. And in those situations, we have a choice of whether or not, like you said, we're going to let that eat at us, or we're going to go to God and trust that he's going to handle the situation or help us cope through it, as opposed to going to our own coping mechanisms that usually aren't as healthy as, or they're not as healthy as most people would, may think of them, right? And so sometimes we have to realize that ultimately, without trusting God in these situations, we ultimately we go to trusting worldly things.
All right. So once again, Winsley, you're spot on. We have different things that we tend to run to when things are troubling us. And we need to run to God and God alone. It is human nature to want to seek refuge in a time of emergency. Angel Gonzalez and I, many years ago, we weathered a hurricane together. Our families, we went to the church building, we all sheltered at the same place. And as the storm was approaching, we went out to see, okay, what kind of supplies are still out. We happened to go to a gas station, and there were people who were lined up to buy alcohol. And there was a very deliberate sense of, hey, if the storm's coming, I want to make sure that I have enough beer and wine and anything harder than that if I can get my hands on it. And it struck me as interesting that this is what they were running to. It wasn't, hey, I need to try and get some food at the last minute. I need to try and get some supplies. And perhaps they had all that. But getting alcohol was a priority. And for many people, alcohol is their coping mechanism. Now, does that make them a worse off person? Does that make them, anything that you turn to that's not of God is not okay. Jesus says, trust in God. And this is what we must do in order to have that peace and comfort. Because when you're not trusting in God, your heart's going to be troubled.
Brother?
Every time. Claire, I don't know if you're saying anything or not, but I cannot hear you.
Hello. Can you hear me now?
Barely. I can barely hear you now.
Yeah, you're on.
Can you hear me
All right,
now?
there you go.
Based on your expression, I'm really thinking you can hear me. I think two things or three things. Three things is to define what faith is. I think it's like one of those words we just know, but I think it'd be good to define what we mean by that. And then two, the second thing is, I think it's really amazing that Jesus didn't say there won't be trouble. I think we as Christians, I think that's an encouragement. There will be trouble in life, and if you're going through troubled times, does not mean you're un-Christian. And the third thing is that he gives us an answer. I think that's amazing.
You're absolutely right. Hang on, my daughter has something she wants to say. I want to read this from Pam McCampbell, and she says, trusting is having a belief in something you cannot see, believing in what you have trust in. And we call that faith. As Christians, as religious people, we call that faith. What do you want to say to us, baby girl?
So, as a matter of fact, Jesus actually did say you will have trouble. He said, in this world, you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. So honestly, I don't like, it's difficult to grasp that because it's like, well, God is protecting us and watching over us, but his disciples, they had problems, anger issues with Peter. And with Paul, he got bitten by a snake, shipwrecked, many other different things. Died twice or 3 times?
A lot of stuff.
Yeah, and that's trouble, but they didn't lose hope or give up faith. And with this politics stuff, I think, well, if they go through that and still follow Jesus, and you can't, and me too, and we can't just deal with a small amount of politics stuff, that I don't know if for sure, but doesn't that represent our faith?
Okay. Yes. Man, there's a lot to digest there. You're absolutely right. There are many things that are far more troubling than the political state that we're in right now. And my daughter brought up the issue of John chapter 16, verse 33, where Jesus says, I've told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. My translation has an exclamation point there, but take heart. I have overcome the world. So what we're talking about is not an absence of bad things happening. If you can only have peace, if you can only trust in God when times are peaceful, then you're not trusting in God at all. That's just the absence of something stressing you. Jesus says, in this world, you're going to have trouble. We know he's always right, but doesn't this one hit you a little bit harder sometimes? In this world, you will have trouble. That's earth. Earth has trouble. I'll share this. There was a man who was very wealthy. I'm failing to remember his name, but just recently he was the guy that was responsible for Sweet and Low, the artificial sweetener. And he's very wealthy. He was an older guy. He was diagnosed with Parkinson's. Now, this man had everything as far as monetary possessions, but because of his Parkinson's, they believe just, I think on Friday, he chose to take his own life at about 86. Even though he had all that money, he still had trouble. His health was failing him, and all of his money wasn't able to fix it. Now, listen, I'm not here to condemn this man. I'm not here to try and say, well, oh, because of this. What I'm saying is that everyone has trouble. Doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter what they look like. You can be young, you can be beautiful, you can be smart, you can be rich, you can be famous. You still have trouble some way, somehow, because you live on earth. It is only in heaven where we will no longer have those troubles. So we must trust in God, must trust in Jesus during those times. Now, Claire, you mentioned 3 things. I think maybe I only addressed 1. Can you help remind me what the other ones were?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Yes, you covered the faith, so we all can be in the same base on what we are referring to. And then the second thing, I think you covered that too, that Jesus said we will go through troubles. And sometimes there's this, I forgot what philosophy out there that's like, if you go through anything wrong as a Christian, that means you're not a Christian, what have you. You know, the what do you call it?
Health and wealth gospel.
Yeah, and prosperity gospel.
Yes.
And then I think that really encourages us when we do go troubling time. It's like Jesus said we would. And then the third thing is that he gave us an answer to it. That's awesome.
Okay,
That's
he gave us an answer. What now?
Yeah, he gave us an answer on how to combat it. I think that's awesome.
Right.
How people are looking for like answers in the Bible, and he's like, hey, all here.
Gotcha. Yeah, so you're absolutely right. The idea is we have to actively put our trust in him. We have to work at it because naturally, the natural state of who we are as humans, we will relax. When we relax, we coast, we drift. When we drift away from God. We drift off to wherever the world is going, wherever our minds or our physical desires take us, which is not godly. God is supernatural. You are natural without him. Now, the Christian has a Holy Spirit living inside of them. So you are no longer your natural self. You are holy because God has made you holy. And you must work to fight the desires of the flesh, which are to be worried. And let's face it, when things are going really, really wrong, it's only natural to worry. You see somebody who's not panicking, maybe they don't know what's going on. Maybe they don't have a full grasp of the situation, or maybe they have faith in someone that's greater. Have you guys seen this happen before? Have you seen it take place?
Yes.
I have too. And it's a powerful thing to witness. So we're talking about that, baby girl, we're talking about politics. We know that God has to be greater. I spent quite a bit of time, I think, monologuing last week about your faith needs to be in God, not in anyone or anything else. Even things that may seem patriotic or normal or somehow good and proper. It's not good and proper if it takes the place of Christ. It's just not. And anything that gets in the way of our worshiping God can become an idol. It can become a stumbling block. And because it's an idol, it's a false God. You will start to worship it. And let me ask you this. This goes out to everyone who is here on the Zoom, on Facebook, and those who are going to be watching this later on YouTube. How much time do you spend talking about politics versus talking about Christ? How recently have you had a conversation with someone about Christ versus politics? On your social media timeline, on whatever platforms you have available to you, what are you posting? What are you talking about? Are you talking about politics? Are you talking about current events? Or are you sharing the gospel? Because we have people who want to share their mind. And I got this from Aurelio yesterday. He was talking to me. We had a conversation with some other brothers, and he said that that's a good question to ask someone. When's the last time they shared Christ? If they're on social media sharing all this political stuff, when's the last time they shared Christ? Because you have stuff on your mind you want to share, you need to be sharing Christ.
Very
and
true.
Go for it, I'm sorry.
I just said very true.
Yeah, I submit to you that if you got time to talk about politics, if you have that passion, if you're willing to put in that work, how much more should you be talking about Christ? There should be no comparison. Yes, baby girl, what's on your mind? You got a lot to say this morning. What's up?
I do. So when you talked about like things being normal and like we want to drift away with what's patriotic and normal, it's definitely not going to be from God, because whatever is normal isn't God, because God isn't normal. So I guess because what's normal is you don't walk on water, and what's normal is you don't feed 5,000 with, oh no, I don't remember the exact number, but that's not normal. And so I just wanted to think about how if you drift away from what's normal, it's eventually gonna end up bad, because what's normal isn't good, because God is the only true good thing.
Yes. All right. So my daughter came in here this morning, apparently to preach to us all, because that's what's happening. But she's not wrong. Normal is not godly. God is above that. I want to share with you Isaiah chapter 55, verse 8, where God says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are my ways your ways." God is above all. He doesn't do things the way you want him to do. Now, it's easy to kind of talk about that on a Sunday morning, like that's a good thing. You know, God doesn't do things the way I want him to do. And it is good, but it doesn't always feel good, because God does things that I don't agree with. And I want you to think about that. God does things that you don't agree with. Why does he do that?
Well, one, because it's not about us. And I mean, we don't know the ways of God. We have to be taught the ways of God. And we only know, honestly, the ways of man. And the ways of man is just about ourselves. Yeah, we could be, unselfish at times, but, at the heart of a man is selfishness, because it says in the selfishness is the root of all sin. So, you know, God is the one that it's his ways, Yeah.
Yeah, Jason, you're absolutely right. It's the ways of God are just contrary to our ways. His perspective is so much greater than our perspective. You can't possibly do what he can do or think what he can think, because you're not him. You don't sit where he sits. And because I'm reading the book of Job, God makes that very clear. The book of Job is tough sometimes when you read it, when you look at the depth of suffering that Job went through. And if you're completely unfamiliar with the Bible and you've ever thumbed through it, Job is spelled J-O-B. We pronounce it Job now, but in the Old Testament, we believe that's pronounced Job. And Job is a story of a righteous man, not a pretty good dude, a really righteous man. And when you read some of the stuff, you go, this guy's not average. Like, he is really on a higher level. God brags on Job to the devil. Now, if you're not a Christian, you're going to be like, what in the world are these religious people talking about? That seems like nonsense. But yeah, he did it. And the things that Job talks about his righteousness and the things that he does on a regular basis, you go, yeah, Job was the most righteous dude on the face of the planet. Not according to his own definition, according to God's definition. And then when Job starts questioning God, he starts out all right, but then he starts to drift because he's suffering. Things are not going well. God has allowed Satan to take so much away from Job. Job starts questioning God, and you would expect God to come down and scoop him up and kind of pat him on the head and tell him everything's going to be all right. And if you know the story of Job, you know the exact opposite is what ended up happening. And you would think, God, why would you talk to somebody who is, by your own definition, the most righteous person on the planet like that? Because God speaks to Job out of a storm. Now, if you're from Florida, if you're from the Midwest, Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, you know that a storm isn't just a rain shower. A storm can be a hurricane. A storm can be a tornado. A storm can be terrifying. But keep in mind, God is not talking to you personally and reprimanding you personally during that storm. I want you to imagine how terrifying it would be if Almighty God is chewing you out through a storm. And that's exactly what happens to Job. And God basically tells Job again and again, you are in no position at all to question me. You, who are the most righteous person on this planet right now, cannot hold a candle to me. Quit asking me these questions. I owe you nothing. I owe you no answers. None. Matter of fact, I'm going to ask the questions. You don't seem to understand how this works. I ask you the questions and you will answer me, which is absolutely terrifying. Job says, I'm sorry, I spoke with words without knowledge. God's like, shut up. I'm not done. I'm still asking the questions, which had to be even more terrifying. Job says, okay, my bad. God says, no, I'm not done with you yet. And he lists these things off. Now, God is great. He is loving. He is merciful. And he blesses Job greater than he had blessed him before. But the point is, God's ways are not your ways. It makes all the sense in the world for me to do the right thing. I should get good results. Doesn't that seem logical? Be a good person, good things will happen to you. But it doesn't always work that way. Bad things happen to good people. Do I need to say it again? I'll say it again. Bad things happen to good people. Okay, see, there you go. Quit that preaching. My daughter said bad things happen to Jesus too, and she's exactly right. And that's ultimately where I was going to try and go, except it was going to be dramatic and it was going to be impressive to you all, except not. Jesus is the only one who's really good. And if bad things happen to Jesus, what you think is going to happen to you? You think really everything's going to go your way? And I say that facetiously, but I think the answer is, yeah, kind of. I did kind of think that. I kind of thought that when I gave my life to Christ, it was going to be a good life. I thought it was at least going to be as good, a little bit better. I thought everything's going to be cool here. Then we was going to go to heaven. It's going to be all good. But for many of you, you became a Christian and life got harder. They didn't tell you that during the Bible study. They didn't tell you that Satan was going to come attack you now and that you're going to have to live by faith, not through your own abilities now. They didn't tell you that. But they should have. During the part where you're supposed to count the cost when they were studying with you, they should have told you that. That's supposed to be part of the study because we are in a battle. And when we are fighting, you're going to get hit. I mean, you think that you can fight a war without ever getting hit? You think you can get into a fight without ever taking a hit? It doesn't work that way. And God told you it doesn't work that way. All right, so that's a lot from me. Give me some thoughts, guys. What's on your mind?
Well, I put something in the chat, a verse, because you were talking about your ways. And so Isaiah 55 kind of emphasizes that, verse 8 and 9. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. So when we think we know God, he's always putting it back out there. You don't know me like that. And this is that part where it's good for us to have a healthy fear of God. A fear of God should promote us to really strive towards the ways that he does things, the examples that he gives us. And when we see his direction and his leadership in our lives, it can cause us to make more and more decisions that are more like his ways. But our matriculation through life is going to be a matriculation until the day we die. And
Yeah.
that means we have to, until the day we die, continue to learn from the ways that God is teaching us.
You're absolutely right. It's a lifelong, actually, it's longer than a lifelong process. It's at least going to take you as long as all the time you have here on this planet. But when God says his ways are above your ways, and thank you for reading verse 9 of that as well, as the heavens are above the earth, how far up do the heavens go? And we're not just talking the atmosphere. How far is space? It's beyond your understanding. And that's one of the examples that he uses. He's like, look, I'm just so far above where you are. You cannot begin to comprehend this. You just can't. You're not going to be able to get where I am and see things the way I see them or think the things that I think. And he just makes that very, very clear from the beginning. Come here. I want everybody to be able to hear you. What are you saying, baby girl?
I think that can also be a good thing, because I don't think I want to just like see all of the bad things that happen in the world and have all of the power. Now I think I do, but like in like the little TV shows, when someone becomes king or something, like in the Lion King, Simba didn't think that there would be so much pressure and power in that, but he was singing all of the songs and enjoying himself. And that's what I think. It's like, oh, all right, well, I think having the power would be great, but you don't see how much the responsibility is. So that's almost a good thing that we don't have all of God's power.
Yeah. Again, a lot of truth in that. That power, that knowledge is not something that you and I would be able to handle. The weight would be too great for you. And think about what you can relate to. Remember when you were a kid? Remember how you were so much in a hurry to grow up? Can't wait till I don't have to live under these rules. Can't wait till I can make my own decisions. And now you just want to get back to being a kid again. Now you miss those times when all you had to do was wake up on a Saturday morning, eat a bowl of cereal, and watch cartoons. But now you got to go to work on Saturday. Now you got to worry about how all of this stuff is going to happen. Power and responsibility go hand in hand. And I think my daughter's so right that no, you don't want that. You think you do. When you look at the apostles, James and John, they wanted to sit at the right and the left of Jesus. Jesus says, you don't want that. You think you want that, but you don't want that. You don't want to drink the cup that I'm going to drink. They're like, yeah, we do. God says, okay. Jesus said, yeah. All right, then you're going to do that. James was the first one martyred. It ain't always easy. It's not always fun. But we're talking about trusting in God this morning. And when you put your trust in God, you will not be disappointed. You will not be disappointed when you put your trust in God. Now, what are some verses to back that up? What are some examples to back that up?
I have a verse. I don't know if it necessarily backs it up, but it's just something I've been thinking about. It's Psalms 20, verse 7. And it says, some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. Which is always a verse I always come to because we do have these trust issues and they come to surface when we run into hard times. KB would say in the new, I keep plugging his album, but I love the album, HGA. He would say, some trust in candidates, Others trust in their management. And so just modernizing what we trust in these days, maybe not chariots and horses, but, who's our candidate, who's our political party, and what do we have surrounding us. So, but again, same answer. We trust in the name of the Lord our God.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I had not, I wouldn't even think of that verse. And you came through in perfect timing and just really helping to direct our attention to that truth. Give me some other thoughts. I got a couple of verses I'll share with you guys after I hear more from you. What are some examples? My daughter asked me to repeat the question. What are some examples? How do we know it's true that when we trust in God, we won't be disappointed? Verses or times where you've seen this play out in your life, in the lives of others, perhaps.
I think 2020 ultimately was an example of that. For some of us, we could have been in a very different space, and with everything that has happened, right? We ultimately could have, we didn't have a choice but to trust God. But at this, because at the end of the day, we, like you said, with the hurricane, right? Sometimes we try to find our trust and hope. We try to trust and hope that these worldly things are going to bring us through these hard times, right? But then ultimately, when we put our faith in God, we see how much stronger we are because God has been leading our lives. We see how much stronger and better life can be when we're able to go through hard times and not, maybe get some smoke, but not be burned, essentially. When we're able to get wet, but not drown, essentially. So that's something that just seeing last year, so much of that has happened. And just being able to see constantly, time and time after again, God just come through at the end of the day, because we're all still here, and so many things could have happened, but we're still unscathed, unburned.
Winslow, you got quite a way with words. Thank you for sharing that with us. The idea of you get some smoke, but you didn't get burned. You got wet, but you didn't drown. And I really love that symbolism, because as Christians, you go through some really difficult things at times. And even if those difficult things take you off of this planet, even when those difficult things take you out of this world, you still win. And that's the thing when people say, well, that's a cop-out. Well, it's the ultimate cheat code. It's what it is. It's winning. It's victory in Christ. Now, it's easy to talk about, but the idea of, okay, I'm going to suffer and I'm going to die in the name of Christ and then go to heaven forever. Okay, that's our ultimate goal. That's what we're living for. You're not going to live here forever. And when you think about it, you don't even want to. You think you do, but you don't want to live here forever. I got a verse I want to share with you. It's Romans chapter 10, verse 11, where the Bible reads, quote, as the scripture says, anyone who trusts in him will never be put to shame. Or another translation says, will never be disappointed. So when you trust in God, it is not in vain. When you believe and obey him, and by the way, that is what trusting God looks like. Sometimes we can get way too religious on this. If there was a boat in the water and someone said, show me that you trust this boat, you would demonstrate your trust in that boat by getting in it and going out on the water. You would do what a boat is supposed to do. God says, I'm your savior. If you trust him as your savior, then you allow him to fight your battles and win victory for you. You allow him to rescue you. When God says, I am your Lord, you trust him by submitting to him. It's not that religious. I can't hear you, baby girl. What?
He's way better than a crusty old boat.
Yes, he is way better than a crusty old boat. He is your Lord and Savior. So when you trust him, you submit to him and you obey him when you don't agree. That's the thing. When God says, hey, go make a lot of money. Lord, I agree with that. I'm going to go make a lot of money. Sure thing, Lord. I trust in you. When he says, sell all you have and give to the poor. Ooh, wait a minute. I don't know about that. Do you trust him or not? And honestly, it only counts when you start to disagree. Otherwise, you're just doing what you want to do. And he happens to say the same thing that you're thinking. But that's not submission. That's not trusting in him. You have to trust in him when you can't see it yourself. If I say, do you trust there's, your hand right in front of your face? Well, of course I do, because I see it. That's not trust. Trust only comes in when I can't see what you're telling me, but I gotta believe it anyway. I gotta go on what you've already done, what you've already said, who you already are, and rely on that fact to get me to the next step. That's trust. Okay, last thing from you, smart girl. What is it?
The Bible verse that says faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. Hebrews 11:1. I memorized that. But
Okay.
I just wanted to think about that because that verse backs up what you were saying. It's like we can't see it, but we hope that it's there.
Yes. And so my daughter's absolutely right. You can't see it and you hope that it's there, but it's not a blind hope. You're not hoping this because I got nothing else. And it's like all the things that he has told you every single day, every piece of evidence that he is giving you, when you have an opportunity or you have an example of something that you don't know, he woke you up every day of your life. Every day he's woken you up. He's fed you. You didn't starve to death. Now there's some people who are starving to death, and we would have to have a very different conversation. But for you, that's not the case. And so now when you don't have a job, Lord, how are you going to provide? God, I've been taking care of you. I'm going to take care of you. It may get rough. It may not look the way you want it to look, but we must trust God that he is going to take care of us, because that's what he's been doing this whole time. So during 2020, during this pandemic, Lord, how are we going to survive? The same way you've been surviving. You thought it was you this whole time? You honestly did, didn't you? And unfortunately, when some of these things happen, it gives us away. I want you to think about it. If you ever tried to take a nail and hammer something in, and then you hit your thumb, whatever comes out of your mouth, that's what was already in you. Those words that come flying out of your mouth in times of trouble, that's what's in you. That's who you really are. It just slipped out. Oops, I wasn't supposed to say that out loud. Hang on, I think you're going to tell me about Taylor? Yeah. Okay, hang on, I'm going to get to that. I saw that on Facebook. I'm going to get to it in just a second. When trouble comes and whatever direction you run, that's going to give you away. What you rely on, that's going to give you away, because that's what you really feel. And that's what you're really about. Sometimes it doesn't line up with what you want it to be. And through the help of God, he can make it into what it's supposed to be, but that's a giveaway. So you're absolutely right, baby girl. Hebrews 11:1, and my dude Taylor has quoted verse on Facebook, Proverbs 3:5, which is 100% appropriate, 100% accurate. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. And if I can finish off, I think verse 6, and in all your ways acknowledge him and he will make your paths straight. This idea of don't trust in your own thinking. And this idea of don't lean on your own understanding. If you've ever had a crutch or a staff or a walking stick, a cane, you use that, you rely, you put weight on that. It is a time of help. It's a tool that you use in a time of need. It can help you. A walking stick can be very valuable. If you're climbing up a mountain or you're hiking through some rough terrain, that stick can help steady you. That cane, that crutch can help keep you upright. And God is saying, don't let the crutch, don't let the cane be your own understanding. Because if you've ever leaned on something you thought was sturdy and it's not sturdy, you are worse off. Because if you said, I don't have a cane, I'm just going to hop. I'm just going to hop on one leg. I'm going to do whatever because I know I don't have anything to lean on. That's fine. But if you've ever put your weight on something that doesn't hold you, it's the worst. You ever try and sit down in a chair that broke? You could have squat down. You could have kneeled down on your own and not fallen. But when you put your trust in something, when you put your weight on something and it gives way, you fall. And God says, don't let that be your own understanding because you will fall. That's not a reliable crutch. Trust in the Lord in all your ways. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and don't lean on your own understanding. Thank you so much for sharing that, Taylor. You are hit that one right out of the park, bro. Appreciate it. Other thoughts as we got about 14 minutes roughly. So many good things are being discussed. What are you guys thinking? I know my daughter's always got stuff on her mind. She'll run away and teach this Bible study if I let her. Let me ask you this. Does the calendar really have anything to do with how things are going? Is that a weird question? Does it matter that we're in 2021 versus 2020?
No.
Whatever
Zajay says yes.
Okay, IT then Winsley.
I was just saying Zajay said yes, I said no. I was saying no because a lot of times we act like just because there's a new year means everything from the prior year has been erased and wiped clean. In some ways, sure, but if you're carrying a heavy load on December 31st, you're probably going to be carrying that same load on January 1st too, and you still got to figure out how to who to give it to and how to handle it. So that's why I was saying no.
Okay, that's why you were saying no. Zajay, would you like to elaborate on why you were saying yes?
Give her just a second. She's on her way over here. All right,
Okay,
here she
no
comes.
problem.
Yes, because prophecy is being fulfilled, and the more the days go by, is the more we're seeing things are happening these days that I was told about when I was a child. So it's the closer we're getting to the day of Christ Jesus. So that's why I say yes, the time matters.
Okay, so IT is saying, hey, you know, whatever you're dealing with before, you're dealing with it now. Zajay's like, well, we're moving closer to the return of Christ, and we are seeing some things revealed that we didn't think that's how things were. And that's, you know, get your political leanings out of it. You see just things in the world that, okay, I didn't know things were going to happen like that. I didn't think things could happen like that. But God has been telling us that this world is not permanent. You know, whatever you've been trusting in will not remain. Only Christ will remain. Only God remains. So if I understand what you guys are saying and why you're saying it, I agree with both of you. Not that you need me to agree with you, but I think I understand, and it makes perfect sense to me. All right, Winsley, will you please share with us what you were saying?
Yeah, I was just saying, I agree with both of you. Thank you so much for sharing. As far as the what I was saying, I think ultimately whatever's going to happen is going to happen, regardless of whether, you know, it's a Monday or Tuesday or, you know, January or, you know, 2020 or 2021. I think ultimately, knowing that God is in control, I think the years and the months are for our benefit and our comfort. But at the end of the day, God moves by a different time. We don't know we don't know the timing that God has, right? He says that we won't know, the timing of his plans. But at the end of the day, that's where the trust comes in. I think it's important that we don't know. I think that's why God told us, didn't tell us when he would come, or told us, or doesn't give us an exact timeline. I think that's why, when he made his promise to Abraham, he didn't put, oh, it's going to happen in this amount of time, because we are not capable of understanding God's timing. I don't believe. I think that's, if God wanted us to know, he would have told us at the end of the day. So I think ultimately, the timing of things is for our comfort, but God moves on it by a different clock than us.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And Taylor's saying essentially the same thing. He says time is a man-made construct. None of it matters. And there's some benefit in thinking, okay, there's a new year. I'm going to start some things fresh. I'm going to change some habits. And it's a way that perhaps we can mark, all right, there was this that happened, and now from this mark forward, I'm going to try and do some stuff. And if that works for you, fine. Some people take and they make New Year's resolutions. That's fine. But who you are as a person and what's going on in the world is not going to be dictated by what the calendar is. And some people will look forward to that. Hey, there's a new year. I can't wait for 2020 to go away. And that's a very popular and very reasonable sentiment. I totally get it. Some people are saying, okay, let's go back a little bit to the politics. All right, we got a new administration coming in. This is going to be all right. Yeah. You must look to the one who is above that, who is outside of time. And the idea of being outside of time is almost impossible to fathom, because we are so limited by time. We cannot know things until the right time. We can't see into the future. You can't travel to the past. You can only move forward in time. And it's a line for us from our perception, but God is outside of that. So yeah, you got a calendar. That's not like it's the official agreed upon calendar of the whole world even. Like other countries use a different calendar. People in other times used a different calendar. So the fact that it's 2021 on our calendar, okay, well, the fact that it's January 17th on our calendar doesn't mean as much sometimes as we would like for it to. Hopefully that all makes sense. But yeah, time is a man-made construct. Yes, Taylor's saying the same thing. There's a little bit of a lag. So hopefully you guys know that there's a bit of a lag between what's going on Zoom and what's going on Facebook. So you're absolutely right. Ours is not the only calendar, but right now it's the most popular. Yeah, we did say it at the same time, Taylor, you're right, especially because of that delay. Any other thoughts as we get ready to wrap up?
I guess I want to go into back or going back a little bit. I want to get your take on triggers. So sometimes we started this discussion talking about the concept or idea of being troubled, in a world where we have God, essentially, right? Where ultimately, yes, we have God, but at the same time, can we control that whether or not we're troubled? That was one of the original questions. And I guess one of the things I was thinking about or wondering your take on is the idea of triggers, right? Sometimes people do things that trigger us or bring up a traumatic experience, or things that bring us back to a place we didn't want to go to, right? People who kind of push us on the edge, right? Or and sometimes it's not an intentional thing, it's not an attack, but sometimes people do things, or we see things that trigger us or traumatize us, almost like PTSD, but in different fashion, essentially. So as far as situations like that, you mentioned controlling by going to God, but uh, what do you think of, well, things like therapy, or things, or like, I guess, other healthy mechanisms that we can use that also don't take us too far away from I guess relying on God, because I think that to put it simply, it's easy to say, okay, just go to God. But I guess I'm wondering, how do we go to God? What does that process look like, and what can we combine with that process to be able to control ourselves in our times of trouble and remember that trust that we talk about?
Okay, that's an excellent question. And thank you for bringing that back up, because I had overlooked it. I failed to follow up because you brought this up earlier. So thank you for bringing this back up, Winsley. The idea of being triggered. First of all, it's real. Let's make sure to get that out of the way. I'm not saying that so that those of you who are listening know that, but I want you to know I know that. So as we move forward, are there things that can happen to you that will put you in a state of mind that may be outside of your control? Yeah, man. PTSD is a real thing. If you suffered trauma, if there's any mental health issues, this is not to stigmatize you. That is not what we are here to do. That is not what God has called us to do. There are some very real things that can completely send you in a tailspin. I think about this along the lines of, if you've ever been hit in the funny bone, I don't know what goes on inside the human body that causes that to happen, but man, it hurts on a weird level, and it's just like that. It just is. When that happens, when it hits you a certain way, it's like, ooh, and it just does something to you. What we are discussing is, what do you do next? Because when you get hit spiritually, physically, mentally, emotionally, however way, when something happens to you, it affects you. It can trigger you. Now, what we are discussing is, what do you do with that? How do you now react? How do you live, and how do you move forward? When someone takes the life of a loved one, let's say that's a horrible example, but many of you have dealt with this, unfortunately. It's very hurtful. It is going to make you feel some kind of way. How then does this affect who you are as a person? Do you become bitter? Do you seek revenge? Do you do things that God has commanded you not to do? Or do you do things that God has commanded you to do? That's going to be a big part of this. Therapy. Okay, you telling me therapy doesn't work? Of course therapy works. If I bust up my knee, there are people who are physical therapists that will help my knee get better. Should I say, no, I'm not going to take any physical therapy, I'm just going to pray? Okay, there's nothing wrong with praying. But you know who invented physical therapy? God. You know who invented medicine and science? God. Ooh, some of y'all not going to like that. All good things come from above. Medicine is real. Science is real. God invented that. There are medicines you can take that can alter the chemicals in your brain that will make you feel a certain way. There can be benefit to that. We must not put those things over God, though. We must not say, you know what, I'm going to trust in this medicine. I'm going to trust in these things. God can use a doctor. He can use medicine. He can use physical therapists. He can use a chiropractor, whoever he chooses to use to bless you. And that's totally fine. When we talk about putting our trust in him, when we say, you know what, I am going to turn to this medicine, and this medicine is going to be what I will use in order to make things better. That can be problematic. It can be habit forming. So we have to make sure that we are weighing everything. Now, you know what else could be problematic? What else could be habit forming? If you say, you know what, I'm just gonna be the most religious person ever. When bad things happen, I'm just gonna dig in. I'm gonna read the Bible more. I'm gonna go to more Bible studies. I'm gonna teach more stuff. Wait a minute. Are you doing these things because you think through those actions it's going to obligate God to make things better? Now you may think, well, Anthony, nobody does that. I did that. I'm tempted to do that. That's a coping mechanism that I have. When bad things happen, okay, well, that must be because I didn't read enough, I didn't do enough, and so I will try and start to muscle my way through spirituality, which makes no sense, but yet here I am trying to do it. A reliance on God and for his deliverance is what we need. And so, Winsley, when you bring this up, physical therapy, mental health counseling, all of those things can be very beneficial. Hang on a sec, guys. Actually, let me mute you guys for just a moment, Deb, so I can wrap this up. But this idea of getting help where it is available, I think is very important. And what we're trying to do is get where God has commanded us to be. And that's to love our enemies. If someone takes a loved one away from you, you're going to need some work to love your enemies. It's going to have to come from God. It may come through a counselor. It may come through some corrective action that needs to take place. But your goal and my goal is to get where God has commanded us to be and making sure that we rely on his strength to get there. And he provides very tangible things. Hospitals are real. When you are sick, go to the hospital. Don't just be like, oh, I'm good. I'm just going to sit here and pray. God invented medicine for your benefit. And we read about it. Luke was a doctor. Like, being a Christian does not exclude you from being able to get physical help while on this planet, or mental help or emotional help. Same thing with financial help. If you are broke and there's a place, an organization, whether it be the church or someone else that can provide some financial assistance, what you pray for can be delivered through these organizations and institutions. This is one of the ways that God answers prayer. So please don't expect him to drop a miracle on you when he's already set something up right here that can be the blessing for you. Were you going to say something, my love?
I just want to say also for people who are going through that journey, to not let the enemy lie to them and tell them, if you're a real Christian, you would be over this by now, that you shouldn't need X, Y, and Z, because you just need to love God, which is stuff people in church say. People, I think, have good intentions, but it's just not true. We all have our own personal journey with God, and grief is definitely one of those things that is not cookie cutter. And as long as you are in step with the Lord, some days you might not move at all, but as long as you're with God, know that your journey and him is personal, and please don't let anybody try to make you feel guilty or shame you for not being where they think you need to be, because you're probably right where God wants you to be.
That's so true. Thank you for sharing that. And once again, Taylor is saying the same thing. This man is we're linked up this morning, Taylor. Taylor says some would argue that it was God that brought to us those mechanisms of healing, in parentheses, therapy, medicine, etc. That seeking out professional help isn't going against God, but using the gifts he gave to others to help people. You know, I agree with it, because I was just trying to say the same thing. And again, because of that delay, we get to see what the other person's thinking and saying in a genuine fashion. So again, I agree completely with that. And what my wife said, I want to echo, I want to emphasize, she is so incredibly right. Grief, healing, it's different for everyone. The process, whether it be because someone is triggered, people have suffered many things in their childhood, maybe suffering things now. There may be some chemical, I want to say imbalance, but that's almost an unfair, I don't want to stigmatize. There may be different things that are going on. And God loves and wants the best. Now, we do not look down on anyone who is going through counseling. I go through counseling. There's stuff that happens, man, to where I'm like, I need to talk to somebody because this feels overwhelming to me. And that's not past tense. It's not like, oh, well, one time back then when I was a lesser Christian, when I was a lesser man, like, no, right now there's like, yo, I need to make an appointment, go talk to somebody, because I still got this thing that's going on. I'm still grieving the loss of this. I'm still worrying about this. I still have doubts. I still have this. And counseling is valuable. Sometimes that might mean sitting down, talking to a friend. Sometimes that might mean talking to somebody who's a professional with some letters after their name. And that's totally fine. I believe, as Taylor's already said as well, those mechanisms are from God. And I don't look down on anyone who goes to seek that type of assistance any more than I would look down on someone who is going to get some physical rehab, someone who's going through chemotherapy or radiation to treat cancer. It's all part of what God has provided for your blessing, for your healing. He doesn't have to do miracles the way you read about them in the New Testament, because he's put people here to do this stuff on a regular basis. And that does not go against who he is or what he has commanded Christians to do. So hopefully that makes sense. Please don't leave here thinking, Christians don't believe in modern medicine. They don't believe in science. I'm an engineer, man. I've studied a lot of science, a lot of math, and absolutely I believe in it. God made it just the way he made everything else. Of course, I believe in it because I see the works of his hands. All right, I think my daughter wants to say something, then we're going to wrap this up. Go ahead, baby.
So I wanted to think about how it's almost like a food chain in a way, because I'm gonna say the plant food chain. You have the sun, and then you have like a seed, a sprigling, a tree, a sapling, and then a tree. And that's like the way with medicine and therapy. It's like first we have God, who's almost like the sun, and then we have the human, and then we have him making the seed, and then he provides that seed with food, water, and shelter in order to grow up to become a sapling and to become a tree to provide shade and shelter for bugs and animals and help people.
Okay. Make sure I understood that. So are you equating the idea that with a plant, the sun provides nutrients, the plant grows up, and then it is able to provide shelter and food and wood and all this other stuff? Are you equating that with how God is the ultimate source, and he put people here and he blesses them to grow up to be able to do things that can be beneficial to others in the form of medicines and therapy? Wow, okay. That's pretty deep. And I think there's a lot to that. I believe that as, wow, there's a lot of depth to that. We may need to pick up on that, but yeah, I think you're absolutely right. God doesn't have to work a miracle because he put you here. He put me here. He put doctors here. He provided for us just the way he provided for plants and animals. God didn't have to feed you by dropping food from the sky because he made a tree that grows fruit for you to be able to eat. Plain and simple. I love that, baby girl. So I'm all out of time. We went over a little bit. Hopefully you guys were still blessed. I know some of you had to cut out, and that's totally cool. We got to get to the park and try and be a blessing as well. Taylor's like, yeah, the whole thing works. The plant also sometimes need outside help in order to grow. You're 100% right. You're 100% right. So we have these good things that we've been discussing. The idea is to trust in God, to trust ultimately in him and not anything else. Anybody want to say anything before we wrap this up?
Be blessed.
All right, my daughter says be blessed. So there you have it. There's been a lot of good stuff that's been discussed, and Lord willing, you've been blessed as a result of it. I know I have. Thank you guys so much for joining us. See you next week.
Love you guys.
Love you too.
See you guys.
Fine. Be blessed.
All right, be blessed. Take care.